Episode 32 of Kowalski Analysis. Tonight, we have on a very exciting guest. His name is Dave Asprey, and he is the creator and founder of Bulletproof Coffee. And he's also considered the father of biohacking. So very excited to talk with him. But before we get into it, I just want to mention my sponsors. The first one, I want to mention my good friend and sponsor, Micah Hughes. Micah does everything real estate. So whether you are a first-time home buyer, you want to sell your house possibly quickly, or maybe you just want to invest in real estate and have some passive income, Micah can help you with all of that. As I said, he's a good friend. He's a City Fan member and supporter, longtime supporter, but he really does care about people, and he considers real estate his ministry. So if you want to get someone to help you with whatever your interests are with real estate, Mike is your guy. You can call him and let him know that I sent you. His number is 443-532-8450, or you can email him at the email address, and I'll put it in the show notes below. I also want to mention Faithful Counseling. I have partnered with Faithful Counseling to provide an effective way for people to get the help that they need and deserve. If you're not sure about counseling, counseling really is about dealing with your past, where life coaching is more about dealing with your future. So a lot of times people have traumas and hurts from the past that they need to get over so that they can move forward successfully in life. So that's why I've partnered with Faithful Counseling. You can mention them. They're an online counseling service, and their mission is to make counseling accessible, affordable, and convenient. Okay, with no further ado, today's guest is none other than Dave Asprey. And Dave is the founder and chairman of Bulletproof 360, a high-performance coffee and food company, and creator of the wildly popular Bulletproof Coffee. He is three-time New York Times bestselling author, host of the Webby award-winning podcast Bulletproof Radio, and has been featured on the Today Show, Fox News, Nightline, CNN, and dozens more. Over the last 2 decades, Dave, the father of biohacking as he's known, has worked with world-renowned doctors, researchers, scientists, and global mavericks to uncover the latest, most innovative methods, techniques, and products for enhancing mental and physical performance. Welcome to Kowalski Analysis, Dave Asprey.
I'm really happy to be here. Appreciate you having me on.
It's an honor. Thank you so much for coming on. Actually, before we get started, I just wanted to show you a little video. I think you might get a kick out of this. I'm gonna share my screen here with our audience. This is from 3 years ago. This is a video I made.
Good morning. I wanted to make a video on how to make bulletproof coffee.
Nice.
Recipe with a few friends, and they love it. Love it.
You
today. Great thing about bulletproof coffee is it tastes amazing, but also you get a nice steady release of caffeine throughout the day instead of a quick spike and then a crash, and also really helps with brain function too. So let me show you how to do it. The first thing that you need is butter, and you cut off a bit, kind of a thick tab, put that in. Then you'll need some coconut oil, and I use a big teaspoon of that. Then if you like it sweet, you'll need some sweetener. I use 2 stevia and 2 Splenda. Now look, I know Splenda is not great for you, but I'm not having sex right now, so I'm gonna have some Splenda, okay? I then add in a cupful of vanilla extract. I add in my coffee, and then some unsweetened almond milk. Usually I like vanilla flavor, but I don't have that today. I blend it all together, and voila.
That was it.
Splenda, come on, man.
Look, I like my coffee sweet. Look, I mean, I gotta have something. I'm not having sex, and I'm not doing drugs right now. So I excuse me for a second. Sorry about that. It's a guilty pleasure. I know. I figured you'd frown on that.
Now there's ways to sweeten your coffee. We got to get you into monk fruit. You get enough monk fruit and stevia in there, you'll probably be all right. And Splenda just wrecks your gut bacteria that makes you actually have more cravings for sex.
Really?
No.
that might be my problem. Too much Splenda. How can I ask you how old you are?
72.
You're not serious.
I am not serious. I'm 48.
Okay. I was gonna say, dude.
I just love doing that. I'm sorry. I know
whatever you're doing, I'm in. How did you come up? I'm 48. I just turned 48 in November.
Yeah, me too. So we're the same age.
What's your birthday?
It's mid-November, right in the middle.
16th. Mine's the 16th.
Okay. Nice. So we're like days apart.
You're the 14th?
Yeah.
That's my dad's birthday. He's dead now, but his was the 14th.
Oh, wow. Cool.
Yeah. So how did you come up with the recipe for bulletproof coffee? I want to say I read this somewhere years ago.
Like, I used to weigh 300 pounds
Yeah,
and I had a lot of health stuff going on that I didn't even know about, and a lot of emotional stuff. And I decided I was going to go to Tibet and learn meditation from the masters after I'd done a lot of the stuff that was supposed to work that didn't work. And I was on the side of Mount Kailash. It's the middle of nowhere in 5 days in a 4-wheel drive to get there. The holiest mountain in the world, 18,000 feet elevation, 10 degrees below zero, feeling like garbage because, high altitude and all. And this little Tibetan lady, literally half my height, Tibetans are short, I'm real tall. And she gives me a bowl of yak butter tea and I drank it. It's yak butter blended in tea. Didn't taste that great, but I felt like, man, something happened. And I came back to Silicon Valley and I started testing. I tried all the different kinds of tea, didn't make a difference. Tried butter, it tasted like gross, didn't work. Tried grass-fed butter and it worked. And then I said, I'll try coffee. Some coffee makes you feel like crap, some doesn't. Figured out what was wrong with coffee and came up with the recipe after like 1,000 tests. And it was a kind of coffee that's free of the toxins that give that jitter anxiety, blended with grass-fed butter and MCT oil, which is pretty incredible. You fast forward, several years later, and anytime you see someone say collagen protein or MCT oil or, keto coffee, any of those things, those are categories I created that are now all $100+ million things that the world is interested in because they work.
Right. Wow. What year was this?
I was there in 2004.
And what were you doing at the time?
I had just finished, let's see. I was working for a startup that we sold for $600 million in the tech world. So I was a computer hacker by training. I worked in computer security, helping to build cloud computing as we know it today. And, typical Silicon Valley entrepreneur, making stuff happen as best I could. And I had just gotten out of a long, really not very good relationship. And I just finished business school. So I took 3 months off and I decided I was going to travel the world and learn from people who studied a lot of stuff that I didn't know anything about.
That's awesome. Man, I miss it. I used to do I probably did bulletproof coffee every day for maybe, and I don't even know if you consider that because honestly, that wasn't grass-fed butter. So I don't know what the differences were.
You are directionally accurate. I mean, there's a lot of people put butter in coffee and like, guys, the right butter and the right coffee makes a big difference. And MCT oil makes a big difference. But the fact that when you put normal milk in coffee, the calcium and one of the other compounds in milk sticks to the good stuff in coffee and stops coffee from being an anti-aging substance. So you were doing it right, at least right-ish.
Right. Well, I miss it. Because my roommate actually gets migraines if he smells coffee. So I've had to come to the office, but I'm going to, now that we're talking, I'm going to bring my little bullet into the office so I can start making it again. Cause
oh man, that's rough. Have you ever thought of like selling your roommate and using the proceeds to buy coffee? I mean, just
yeah, not a bad idea. So how old were you when all this happened, when you had this big, transformation?
Well, I had 100 pounds to lose. I had arthritis in my knees when I was 14. I had all the diseases of aging, prediabetes, high risk of stroke and heart attack, cognitive dysfunction, all by the time I was 30. So really, over the last 18 years, I figured it out. I tried a bunch of diets before then. I tried working out 6 days a week, an hour and a half a day for 18 months straight on a low fat, low calorie diet. I still had a 46-inch waist. Just the weight wouldn't go off. Wow. And I go to the doctor and say, something's not working. And he'd say, yeah, you're eating Snickers bars. I'm like, God damn it. Listen to me, man. I'm working my ass off here and it doesn't work. And the doctor was trained to say, you're lying. And the reality was that it doesn't work for a lot of people. So I just said, you're fired. And I spent 4 years digging in really deeply on biochemistry, spending hundreds of thousands of dollars to see anything that would work. And then finally just understanding the mechanisms of it. I use the things that I use for hacking and for designing scalable systems you can manage even if you don't know everything. And I realized what we're doing with our body is we're managing our body, even though we don't know a lot about how it works. You can measure what you put in, you can measure what you get out. And then if something's supposed to work and it doesn't work, instead of feeling like a failure, I'm like, oh, I'm at Carl's Jr. Let's see, all my thin friends are eating double Western bacon cheeseburgers with fries, and I'm eating the chicken salad with no chicken and no dressing, and I'm still fat because there's too much lettuce. Like, no, it's because it doesn't work. And that was the motivation for me to start this thing called biohacking and build a community. And there's people who've lost 1 million pounds on with my advice on my diet, and it's continuing to grow.
Yeah. What was that all that like when you were scaling it? I mean, how did people like hear about you, or, how did you, cause I've seen you on some incredible shows. I've heard Joe Rogan talk about you, Tom Bilyeu, and, Lewis Howes. I watched that interview. So it was just the results started to speak for themselves and people started seeking you out, or.
I always laugh. People like, Dave, you're a genius marketer. I'm like, actually, here's the thing. Make stuff that is dramatically better than what's out there that actually works, and people talk about it for free. And truly what happened, I was already going and I said, look, no one ever does stuff for entrepreneurs. Like, we care about stuff different. We want energy beyond belief. We always have something important to do. We want our brains to work all the time. And we'd probably like abs too. But that's only if you're single. Right?
I want to look good naked just in case.
Exactly. But like, you want your brain on, right? And because we tend to burn ourselves out, we work really hard. We tend to not always have that state. And so I started writing a language for us, and it took off in Silicon Valley, right after that in Wall Street, because, those guys are always on. And then it kind of simultaneously became pro athletes and Hollywood and the recording industry. So pretty soon I'm like, Rick Rubin's in the New York Times saying I drink bulletproof coffee for breakfast. I'm like, Rick Rubin, this guy's been like the producer on every song I've ever loved.
Yeah.
Right? And we ended up becoming friends. And Shailene Woodley's on Jimmy Fallon, and there's been 2 minutes talking about bulletproof coffee. I didn't pay for it. I don't know either of them. I'd love to, but it was just because they drank it and like, oh my God, I like my brain. I lost weight, whatever. So it was truly a groundswell. Even with getting on the Joe Rogan show, I've been on there 3 times. And the first time was one of his buddies was like, this stuff changed my whole life. Like, you should talk to Dave. And I didn't, frankly, it does sound weird. I didn't know who Joe Rogan was back then. I have a top 100 podcast with a couple 100 million downloads, and I have truthfully never heard a podcast from beginning to end. I read a lot faster than I listen, so I'll read a transcript, but I won't listen to the show. I'm just like, I got stuff to do.
Yeah, his are super long too.
It was funny. And then with Joe, for people who know the whole story there, he invested in a competitor, and then he decided he was going to try and wreck my reputation, and it didn't work. So I'm still grateful that I was on his show 3 times, and no bad blood there, at least not on my side.
So Onnit is considered a competitor of yours? Is that who you're talking about?
Well, so Onnit, who Joe owns something in, decided they're going to try and launch a competing MCT oil. And they were going to launch their own coffee. And so there's a concerted effort to say that I was lying and all sorts of stuff, none of which was true. And all I ever did was just post links to all the science behind what I said. And eventually the trolls backing him just found something else to do. It was an exciting time. I'll definitely put it that way.
So I'm not sure that like a lot of my audience isn't probably educated on biohacking. I can't even say I am into all the nuances, but can you explain what it is and maybe unpack a little bit of the bigger blocks related to that? Well,
when I was creating the definition for it and we had the first conference and all, I thought really long and hard about it. And I came up with the art and science of changing the environment around you and inside of you so that you have full control of your own biology. And this unites like crazy people you'd never expect. So the neuroscientists are, oh yeah, I get it. The nutritionists, right? Then like astronauts and special forces and exercise physiologists and heck, even addiction, right? Control of your own biology. I want my body to stop telling me to do whatever it is that I'm addicted to. And frankly, I have this new book on fasting. I talk about fasting from food. It's the same voice in your head that's like, you got to eat the cookie. And keep in mind, I was a 300-pounder. You got to eat the cookie, right? It's not that dissimilar from the voice that says you got to do whatever it is you're addicted to, right? And there can be trauma behind addictions. There's also an energetic deficit going on. And you'd be amazed how many different groups for addicts where they're saying, yeah, why would you bulletproof coffee? Because this is going to sound weird. When you have more raw energy in the body, you have more willpower. And then at those times when you're right on the cusp, like, oh, I got enough energy, I'm going to push through. I'm not going to eat the cookie, or I'm not going to do whatever the other thing is. Sure. And it's funny. In your video, you're like, oh, I'm not having sex right now. I actually talk about fasting from sex in my new book, right? About abstinence and how, that actually can make a really big difference for people. And there's a voice in your head and it says, if I don't ejaculate right now, it's the end of the world. And then you're like, I think even though I said I wasn't going to, I'm going to, right? And there's a voice in your head that says, if I don't eat right now, I'm going to starve to death. Dude, you got 2 more months before you starve, probably 3 or 4. But that voice in your head is not telling you the truth, right? And it's the same thing for almost every repetitive behavior we do that we wish we didn't do. And so I feel like the idea of intermittent fasting or any sort of abstinence, one way to do it was like, hey, what if you just push through it? Like, I'm going to muscle through. I'm just going to use my willpower. If I get weak, I'm going to call a friend. And then that works, right? I'm going to set up structures and habits. I'm going to remove things that might be tempting. Or the other one is I'm going to change something in my biology or in my environment so that I don't care about it anymore. And then it's a lot easier to not do the thing you didn't want to do. And part of my path, about 4 years after I was in Tibet learning all that, I was like, I figured out I'm afraid of being alone. Like I didn't realize that this was a part of my composition, but it was why I got in relationships I got in. And so I hired a shaman to bring me to the middle of nowhere and drop me off in a cave for 4 days. So no food, no people. Like, I'm going to face my fear of starving. I'm going to face my fear of being alone because there's no food and there's no people. And even if I freak out, there's nothing to do but, look at a cactus. And that's actually the arc of the book. I write about all the things that go through your head, as well as what happens biologically, and understanding the roots of where and why we do the things we wish we didn't do. And people do a lot of things they wish they didn't do.
Did you have fluid, like water or anything?
Oh yeah, I had water. It wasn't a dry 4-day fast in the desert. It's probably not going to end well for most people. Oh, right, so right. I just had water, salt, a sleeping bag, lighter, and knife and a flashlight.
And were you on a cave, or were you just out in the open in a cave?
I was in a cave that had been used ceremonially for at least 10,000 years. I had the permission from the local tribe to go do that.
Wow.
It's pretty neat.
Yeah, that's wild. So I'd read a quote of yours earlier that said, sex is one of the most powerful drives you have. It's tough to hack it. So my question is something I wrote about I wrote a book called Why Waiting Works, which is basically about the practicality of saving sex for marriage.
Yep.
So I talk a lot about sex transmutation in the book, which is a principle I really learned about originally from Think and Grow Rich, Napoleon Hill's
There
book.
You go, man. You're on it.
So yeah, can you just talk about that a little bit? Because I'm sure there's people out there that have no idea about that.
And it's so cool you talk about this, because I touch on it in Fast This Way. And by the way, you can tell I'm in publishing mode for the book. So, people want to read about all of these things. I appreciate pre-orders greatly, because as an author, it matters, But what transmutation does, and I learned when I was 16, I read Think and Grow Rich. I can't say I believed on the transmutation part of it, but later on, I came across some Taoist philosophy, and they said, you know what? If you want to live a long time, don't ejaculate too much. And they had a rule, like a math equation, and it's age in years minus 7 divided by 4.
Hold on, let me write that down. Age in years minus 7. So that's
divided by 4. So for you, it's going to be about 8 or 9 days. They're saying don't ejaculate more than every 8 or 9 days, or you'll get old. And if you want to live a long time, ejaculate once every 30 days, but keep your orgasm to less than an hour when you do that.
That seems like a lose-lose. So not only do I get to ejaculate less, I have to live longer.
Well, that was kind of my thought. And so I'm like, these guys are full of shit. Okay. A lot of biohacking proves ancient knowledge. So I set out for a year to disprove this. So every time I had sex, every time I ejaculated, I tracked it, and I tracked my daily happiness. Right. And I'm married. I have a couple kids. My wife was totally cool with this. And so I tested this. I tested just, ejaculating whenever you have sex, whenever that happens. And then I tested once every X number of days. And then I tested once every 30 days. And I published all the data in a graph. And I promise you, there's 100% certainty that there is, in men only, an ejaculation hangover. And so the day after you ejaculate, you just don't like your job as much. You don't like your wife as much, or your partner. And it's real. And I saw the data. I'm like, damn it, these old, Eastern religion people were right. And I mean, it took a year of this, and it's kind of embarrassing to, put the data up. You're like, well, this is going to be 30 days, but on day 24, it's like, oops, reset the counter. And the deal is not that you can't have sex. It's just that you don't ejaculate. And if you look at Ayurveda, you look at Tantra, you look at all these practices, they'd kind of figure this out. And what they say is that ejaculation depletes men because we have to make prostaglandins and hormones and stuff that goes into ejaculating. And in women, it doesn't. So for women, frequent orgasms are correlated with higher emotional intelligence and general happiness and just showing up better in the world. So you can be like, this doesn't work. But what you realize when you look at data over time is like, you know what? The less often I ejaculate, the more sex I have. Because you're like, hey, I'm ready to go again. Hey, do you want tomorrow night? Let's have some cuddle time, right? And that's actually good for a relationship. It raises oxytocin, but it also raises that question of, as you're getting close, okay, you'll be like, I am not going to ejaculate. And as you're getting close, there's gonna be a voice in your head that says, you know what? Right now, the best decision on earth is to ejaculate. And you'll convince yourself right on the fly that it's time, right? And I know enough people who've been addicts as well. It's like, you know what? I wasn't going to do it. And then I saw whatever that trigger was. I was at the bar, I saw a needle, whatever the trigger is. And you're like, you know what? The best idea in the world right now. And as soon as you're like, God damn it, why did I do that?
Right.
It's the same urge, but I know where that comes from now. Like that training in Tibet, the neuroscience work that I've done. I actually have a neuroscience company that trains people's brains. You want me to explain it? I can break it down for people listening.
Yeah, I'd love to hear that.
All right. Everything alive, starting with bacteria, everything bigger. It doesn't matter if you're a plant. It doesn't matter if you're a sheep. It's anything. You got to follow these rules. These are the minimum rules that you can pack into a single-celled organism. They don't have brains. They can't think, but they can follow basic survival things. Step 1, run away from, kill, or hide from scary things. Okay, that's fear, right? And if you don't do that, something will eat you and then your species will end. So all life basically responds to fear with 10 times more intensity than is necessary, unless it's actually a real threat. The next thing is everything on Earth, our ancestors died of famine at some point. So we're all afraid of that. So you put 5 times more emphasis on eating everything in front of you. Okay, right? And then the third thing let me ask you this. The first one is fear. The second one is food. There's something else that all life has to do.
Sex.
Yeah, but it's also an F word.
Fuck.
I was gonna say fornicate but okay, no, I'm kidding. But you know what I'm saying? So there's these 3 F words and you get 3 times more emphasis on that than is actually worth it. So what's really interesting is, have you ever done anything you're ashamed of that didn't come from one of those 3 F words?
Wow. Hold on. I'd have to think about that. I'm sure there has to be something.
No one's ever been able to come up with one.
Really?
So, I mean, if we're talking about addiction is straight up the first F word. It's fear.
Fear.
Right. And you're looking to cover up the fear. Right. And that fear comes from trauma. And what that is when your automated detections, because we're not just single bacteria, we've got to follow those rules. But you have a quadrillion ancient bacteria embedded in your cells calling the shots. They're called mitochondria. So there's, in a lot of your cells, there's 15,000 of these little things looking around going, is that a threat? Is that a threat? And then they talk to each other. Is that a threat? And eventually, like after a quadrillion individual sensors decide if it's a threat, you get this little thing that goes, I don't feel good right now. There must be a threat. And then you feel anxiety. And then you blame the anxiety on something and you look to remove the anxiety. How are you going to remove the anxiety? Well, you can do breath work. You can meditate. You can take a drink. You can do whatever the thing is. You can go jack off, right? Like all of those are ways that people deal with that anxiety. But what's really happening is the threat detection system that gets 10 times more attention. Something is triggering it in your life, but that isn't really a threat. But your body responds as if it's a threat. And then your brain, which is pretty smart, it's like, I know there's a threat because I feel it. Therefore, I'm going to make up a story to justify the threat. And the more traumatized you are, the rougher your birth was, the rougher your childhood was, the more you were bullied, if you're abused, that actually increases the number of things that will trigger you to think that it's a life or death situation. And when that happens, it pulls things away from sex, it pulls things away from food, and it pulls things into fear. Right. And so you're juggling this 10 times emphasis on fear, 5 times emphasis on food, 3 times emphasis on sex. So you miss out on the 4th F word that all life does, which is friend. So bacteria get together, they form yogurt, right? You get sheep, they form a herd. You get people, we form tribes. We're actually wired in our cells to support each other, to be kind to each other, to build communities. But we won't do that if we think someone's trying to kill us. Right. So we're desperate to turn off what's trying to kill us. And what I found over the course of the last 20 years and helping people lose 1 million pounds and all that kind of stuff is that the voice of those three that's easiest to silence is the voice about food. And that's why I wrote Fast This Way, because no matter what kind of diet you eat, you don't have to go on the bulletproof diet and all that. If you learn to do things that remove cravings for food, so then you can skip breakfast and just not even think about food versus I'm going to skip breakfast. I'm just going to power through it. Powering through anything sucks. You can do it, but it takes energy. I'd rather put that energy into being a friend, right? Being of service. So you can handle that. You can do a lot of stuff to deal with fear. And you can also, the hardest one, actually, maybe fear is the hardest one, but the other one, dealing with sex. That idea, like, if I don't have sex, man, you feel like you're going to die. But I'll tell you, you learn to go 30 days while having sex and not ejaculating. Do that a few times. You realize you don't need it to live. And then you can actually be at peace around sex. And you're probably going to be a lot better lover anyway. Like, there's nothing wrong with that. And when you're saying, all right, I don't want to have sex until I get married, there's nothing, I don't know if this agrees with your opinions and your learnings and your teachings or not. There's nothing that says you can't actually masturbate. Just don't ejaculate all the time, right? And maybe you want to say, I'm not even going to do that, right? And either one of those, okay. I will tell you that if you learn what it feels like to get close to ejaculating and have enough self-control to not do it, you'll be a lot happier when you do finally end up having sex, right? You can actually learn how to do that. But either way, I'm going to die if I don't get laid voice in your head is absolutely 100% lying, but you've got to teach your body that it's lying, right? And one way, willpower. The other way is show it who's boss. Yeah. And that's why skipping breakfast, like, I'm in charge of our food. Don't worry, you're not going to die. And then I'm in charge of our sex. Don't worry, we're not going to die. There's a competing voice in your body that comes from inside your cells. And then there's you, and you just have to train it. Be strong. I'm the boss. And then there's always a constant dance between those two. That's why I wrote Fast This Way, because it's easy to say, I'm going to write a book on fasting. Step 1, don't eat for a while. Step 2, here's a bunch of science about why it's good for you. That's easy. And there's great books like that. But the one about how do you actually do it without suffering in a way that's repeatable for the rest of your life, that was my goal on this. And it takes a little bit of learning.
Yeah.
What do you think about that masturbation thing? Am I wrong?
Dude, there's just a lot to unpack in everything you just said. So for me, like, I've been abstinent for 15 of the last 20 years. It has not been fun. Like, honestly, I did it initially because I was just wanting to be obedient to God. I thought that I would get a payoff. I'd fall, God would give me a wife if I didn't sin after a while. Didn't happen. Backslid, is what they call it in Christianese, rededicated. Again, just wanting to be obedient, and really started to understand the practicality is when I wrote a book, and I made a pretty popular YouTube video about it. But so for me now, it's somewhat selfish. I know that by waiting, I'm going to say my best yes, versus my first yes or my 10th yes or whatever it is that I see people make, and then they get into relationships with the wrong people, and that's why there's a 50% divorce rate, and
it does happen.
All kinds of other problems. So for me now, it's somewhat selfish because, and plus I've been, now I have a platform around it, so there's that. But not masturbating is more motivated in probably also wanting to be obedient to God. That whole, like, Jesus said, if you lust after a woman in your mind's eye, you commit adultery in your heart. So I'm always thinking about, usually if I'm jerking off, I'm going to be thinking about something that I did that probably wasn't, like,
you're feeding the beast.
Yeah. I'm like thinking about something dirty I did with some girl years ago, or, whatever, something that I was not in love with that girl. I was just fucking, and so I'm, here I am, entertaining this idea. And then I still do believe that a thought leads to an action leads to a habit leads to a character leads to a destiny. So if you're thinking about stealing something, let's say a candy bar, after a while, you probably are going to steal a candy bar. So I try to keep it, and I'm not perfect at all. Like, this is the hardest thing that I've probably ever done, but I've definitely gotten better at it. I'm curious about the whole, sex without ejaculating, because that to me almost seems like I've never done that. I probably have done it once or twice, only because, like, the girl was that bad in bed and I just stopped. But I never did it with any intention. To me, that would be like chewing up with something delicious and then not swallowing it.
Here's the intention. Here's the shift that happens. And so this didn't come naturally to me, at all. But what happens is you're like, what? My job here is actually to be of service to my partner. right? So I'm going to give my wife, a soul-shattering, beautiful connection to the world that is healthy and beneficial and, of service to our relationship. And I'm going to do a really good job on it. And I'm going to achieve mastery in my ability to do that. Right. And then it doesn't become about you. It becomes about your partner. Right. And then it's about two people together. Right? But you have to have a partner, I think a committed partner to do that kind of a thing. Right. So, when you're married and it is time to make love, you're like, okay, how do I make this the most special experience it can possibly be? And from what I understand from talking with various religious leaders, and I've interviewed, the head of the Episcopalian Church on my show, and just personally, I've had the opportunity to talk to some great spiritual leaders. They're generally in alignment with that. Like, you can have a spiritual experience in bed in a committed relationship. And when you're not making sex about your pleasure, but it's about your partner's pleasure, I think that's in alignment with the teachings of God. But I could be wrong.
It sounds 100% accurate. Like it sounds very selfless, very unselfish.
It becomes selfless because you're like, the end goal of this is not me ejaculating. The end goal of this is my wife experiencing extreme heights of pleasure, and me also experiencing it, but also maintaining control, and us having a really special experience. And there are people who will tell you straight up, from all faiths, that like, I met God in bed last night. It was a spiritual experience. It wasn't just sex. And to take sex from being dirty and to make it something divine, it is possible, at least for some people.
Yeah, I think that's been a big, way the church has dropped the ball. It's like, they don't talk about it, and they make it dirty. Like, it's not dirty. God invented sex. He created it. It's not supposed to be dirty. Now, there are certain guidelines, you make sure you're having it with the right person, which again goes back to the whole waiting thing. But I think that the church largely has dropped the ball on that by not talking about it, because you got even like pastors having sex, with people in their congregations, and just, it's crazy, But I used to have you mentioned that the whole like, really being thoughtful of your partner in bed. I used to have an old friend, and he would say to girls before he had sex, he'd be like, I'm guaranteeing you. He's like, I guarantee one orgasm, mine.
Oh man, that's the opposite of it.
No, that is the opposite. I just thought it was a funny line. So you're obviously a believer in like no FAP and all that then, because that's basically like seminal retention, right? Where you kind of retain it. Okay.
I have a really good interview with John Gray, and you've got to get John on your show, the Mars and Venus author. He was a monk, and he was celibate for 7 years. And he wasn't really willing to talk about that publicly. Like, we're good friends. And then after his wife passed away, she's the one who's been like, could you not talk about that? So he's just been out there talking about how testosterone drops precipitously after you ejaculate the next day, and what it was like for him being celibate for 7 years. Versus what it was like when he just said, I'm going to incorporate that into my spiritual practice. And it's a different way of thinking about it, but understanding, no FAP. When I first started talking about this very early on in my blog about 10 years ago, I had a lot of young guys like, Dave, I thought it was a little bit crazy, but I started doing Bulletproof Coffee, which gives you actually more electrons, more energy in the body. And I stopped watching porn and stopped masturbating. Or just stopped, hooking up with random people for a month, and sometimes for longer. And they're like, I got a $30,000 raise. I started 2 new companies. Like, that transmutation thing, it is so legit, and it's legit for guys. I don't think it works for women, from the women I've talked to. But what does work magically is when you have a committed relationship and the woman understands that transmutation is real. A lot of women will feel like if they don't make their man come, that they have failed in bed. And you can turn it around and be like, if you make me come, it's a failure. So it's my job to make you come, like, let's race. Right. Yeah. And it takes a lot of the pressure off both partners. And I think it creates better sex. Right. And it's not exactly no FAP, not by a long shot, but it is definitely a practice of willpower, and determination and partnership. And when you do it, you walk away from that with a lot more energy. And at the time when you're like, I'm like, 3 strokes away, there's only one thing I want on earth and it's to finish. And you're like, I'm just not going to do it. And when you achieve that spiritual mastery over the voice in your head and any urge you have, the willpower over your urges translates to your willpower over eating junk food, your willpower over flipping someone off you shouldn't flip off, over yelling at your boss, over substances that you might do. It is one of the ultimate hardest things you can do. Say, all right, I'm gonna put the brakes on when everything is not telling you don't do that. But you do that a few times, I think you become a stronger man. You really do.
Oh yeah, 100%. I mean, I can't say I know for sure about what you're talking about, but I know that learning to master my sexual urges, where I just, it's been long stretches where I haven't had sex and I've denied myself in that area. It's translated into probably every other area of my life. I definitely credit the abstinence to a lot of my biggest life's accomplishments, writing my books, starting my nonprofit. I wouldn't have done any of that. I mean, they're all related to community, which I want to talk to you a little bit about in a moment, because I do think that that's something that you can share a lot of insight on. But I really want to talk to you. I heard you said a quote about pornography and compared it to corn syrup. I couldn't find it.
Oh man, I wonder exactly what that quote was. I do a lot of interviews. But yeah, pornography it's kind of like you could eat real food or you could eat junk food, and pornography is junk food. It's spiritual junk food, to be perfectly honest. It takes your thoughts away from a lot of the good stuff.
Yeah.
And it's same thing. You can eat something that's just full of junk, or you can eat something that's full of nutrients, right? And they'll both go in your mouth. They'll both taste good, but the outcome is very different. Do you feel good afterwards?
No.
Do you feel depleted afterwards? Right. And I'd like to eat foods that leave me full, and I like to have a love life that leaves me full. Right. It's not to say I don't ejaculate. I've been married for a long time. Right. But I will tell you, I don't ejaculate all the time. And I generally follow that equation that says, once every 8 days or so. And my wife knows that too. And, she's more than happy to help me out on that. In fact, I think sometimes she kind of enjoys it. She's like,
No, that's, so for me, it's been a battle with just, like not only not having sex, not masturbating, and I'm desiring never to look at porn. Actually, Frank Rich is a friend of mine that challenged me to do that, who I want to introduce you to. I told him I was interviewing you, and he was super interested. And but I know when I have looked at porn, and I looked at it not that long ago on Thanksgiving. Actually, I'd gone it was about a month, I think, without masturbating or looking at porn. And before that, I think it was 3 months without looking at porn. And there's even been times I think I went as long as a year and a half. But anyway, I just know that the next day I feel like shit, and I can't say exactly what it is. I think part of it is definitely shame, but I think there's more going on than just shame, because I know that I'm, there's forgiveness in Christ and all that stuff. So, but there's something, like you said, physiological.
It's real.
Yeah, it's real. It's for sure. It's real. It's like I poisoned myself or something is what it feels like.
It's in your tissues. You had a precipitous testosterone drop. And man, if we haven't already sent you Fast This Way, like the advanced, but I talk about this in there because one of the types of fasting that is practiced in all religions, including Christianity, there's fasting from food, but abstinence is a big deal, right? And sometimes you do those two together, right? Do you abstain in multiple ways in order to reach a higher spiritual level? Yeah, it's a normal practice, right? So I was going to ask you about that, forgiveness thing, because there's the forgiveness of Christ, and then there's self-forgiveness. And in the work that I do with, electrodes hooked on usually entrepreneurs' heads at my company called 40 Years of Zen, and it's not like a Buddhist thing. It's just like, zenning out kind of thing. And what I find there is we teach people to do actual forgiveness, and you can measure forgiveness in someone's brain, but you feel it in their heart. And we actually show people, look, you go through this step-by-step process in your head. And one of them is you visualize the deity of your choice, right? And the one that works best for forgiveness is usually Jesus, at least for most Westerners, right? But, and that's a part of the process. And you do that mostly to hold yourself accountable, because what most happens is we say, all right, let's say someone was mean to you in 7th grade and you haven't thought about it in 20 years, but there's actually shame that got turned on at that point. So all of a sudden it pops into your mind. So you sit down and you go through this forgiveness process, and there's basically a lie detector telling you whether you achieved real forgiveness. And so the first thing you do is you forgive the bully, right? It doesn't mean you call them and say you forgave them. It just means that you stop holding the grudge that was kind of in your tissues, because you're like, oh, it's threatening whenever someone tries to shame me. Therefore, I'm going to respond real strongly with my ego and all that. But then you got to turn around and be like, I'm going to forgive myself, right? So there's the forgiveness from a higher power, but there's also, how do you forgive yourself? And so, the day after that, you're dealing with, okay, how do I go about, this accepting that I'm human, I'm mortal, we make mistakes, we forgive ourselves, and there's the power to be forgiven by a higher power. But it's that second thing. How do I forgive myself? Even if I know that God forgave me, right? That's where a lot of shame and things get stuck. And the teaching that works best with the people who do the neurofeedback program, it's that the difference between shame and guilt. And that shame is about what you are and guilt is about what you did, right? So you can be a divine being, and made in the image of your creator or whatever your belief system is. However, you can also make mistakes, right? And that's a part of being who you are. You're like, oh, in that case, I'm not actually a piece of shit. But it's really hard when you feel like a piece of shit because your testosterone levels that give you brain power were up here and now they're down here. So it's like doubly challenging to be kind to yourself the day after you ejaculate, especially if it's in a way, that makes you feel guilty.
Yeah.
And that's the trap, right? So then you could wait a day until your testosterone rebounds. Like, oh, okay, I'm feeling a little bit better. Like, let me, journal about this. Let me, pray about this. Let me see what I did that, like, can I unpack why I did that and accept, what, I screw up a lot and, it's all right. I'll be forgiven, but being forgiven is one thing. I will do the forgiving on myself. That for me is the hard part on any time when I do something I wish I didn't do.
Yeah, for sure. It's so good that you said that. I actually, the last episode of the podcast, or one of the last ones, I talked to a guy that was America's #1 heartbreak coach.
Oh, wow.
And I asked him, what's the #1 rule for, getting over a heartbreak? And he said, forgiveness. Because it's like you beat yourself up over staying in the relationship too long, or, not seeing you knew that your intuition was telling you they were cheating and then you didn't follow it, whatever. But it really boils down to forgiveness. For me, like, it's just, until somebody's done the whole waiting thing, it's hard to explain how difficult it is, because I'll go a month, or like I said, I went 3 months earlier this year, and that's 90 days of being good. Like I've like ignored thousands and thousands of hard-ons. You just got to ignore them. And then all it takes is just one thing. Like you get a little feeling sorry for yourself, or you get depressed, or you just get rebellious and you want to like shake your fist at God and be like, this is bullshit. It's been too long, because I'm waiting for him to send me that one that blows me away. And it hasn't happened. So sometimes any one of those things, or you just get really horny, but sometimes it's other things, it's depression or, frustration, so, and all it takes is that moment of stupidity, and then boom, you do it. And then you feel like shit for a day. It takes me usually about a day just to kind of forgive myself, and then to get back on the horse. But it's not easy. I want to talk to the guy that's been able to do it, like, for long periods and not even masturbate. Cause like, I don't know if that guy exists.
You got to talk to John Gray.
I will.
7 years.
7 years of not even. Okay. So he was,
I don't know if he masturbated or not, but as a monk, I doubt it. I really doubt it. He's a man of his word.
I went from being the biggest man whore in my city. I was the biggest stripper in Baltimore, to being abstinent for 6 years. So that was not easy. I mean,
that's a big swing.
Yeah, it was huge. And I masturbated sometimes, but that was when I went 1.5 years, and it was just powering through it, like you said, but it was not enjoyable. It was super difficult. So, so I want to talk about community a little bit, because you mentioned, friends as the fourth thing. I read it. There's a Harvard study. Actually, I think I referenced it in my book. I think it's the oldest Harvard study that they ever conducted, where they talked about, so about it.
Like 80 years or something.
Yeah,
they follow these
years.
guys forever, right?
Yeah, and they said that was kind of the biggest factor more than even your genetics or your, like exercise or even your diet, I think was your relationships with people. So
yeah.
can you unpack that a little bit? My thought is because, one, you're not depressed if you have community. I know when I'm around good friends, I'll laugh, right? Just laughter, like, cause we'll just be like talking shit to each other and we'll be laughing. Now, if you're most people aren't going to sit around their house by themselves and laugh unless they're a psycho, like, so I don't know. What is it? Why does it make us live longer?
There's a lot of hormonal changes that happen when you're around community. Your oxytocin levels go up, your cortisol levels go down, your testosterone goes up, which is a good thing for longevity, right? And you have the amount of fun that you have goes up, and it's a predictor of overall happiness. And the bottom line is, happy people live longer. we know that. We probably don't know all the reasons they do, but there's another study. Actually, there's several of them that tie in on this. One of the books that I wrote was called Game Changers. I interviewed 500 people on Bulletproof Radio on my show. And I said, all right, what are the 3 most important pieces of advice you have for people who want to perform better at everything they do as a human being? And I'm asking like Nobel Prize winners, authors of books, fathers of fields of medicine, like people who've accomplished things, spiritual masters, all kinds of people. And then after I had 500 answers to this question, I used math and statistics to boil it down to about 43 things that were kind of rules. And one of the things that came out was, the strength of your relationship at home is a predictor of longevity and a predictor of happiness and a predictor of showing up the way you want in the world. And the number one predictor of whether someone would stay together in a relationship wasn't actually how good the sex was in there, but it was whether the relationship had community support. So if you're in a church and your church supports relationships, you're much, much less likely to get divorced. And if you're not in a church, but you have a group of people who says, we support each other in having conversations about our relationships and just staying together, right, and staying healthy, and frankly also leaving a relationship with someone who's abusive and won't do the work to fix themselves. If you have black eyes all the time, my advice would be you probably need to leave, even if you don't believe that divorce is an optimal thing to do. Neither is dying. So there's times when just staying together is not okay if both people won't step up and do the work. And there's times when we are going to step up and do the work. You'll do the work if your community supports you. If your community doesn't support you, you won't do the work and you'll break up. Yeah. So there's a lot of intermingling of these things. And ultimately, though, I truly do believe it comes down to how much electrical power do you have in your cells, which powers your willpower, that allows you to receive an urge, whether it's an urge to yell at your spouse, whether it's an urge to eat a bunch of junk food and, binge and, do things that are unhealthy, or whether it's an urge, to go masturbate or look at porn or whatever else. How much energy do you have to be who you want to be? And I found that when I'm doing personal development work on myself, or when I'm working with clients, if we eat the right stuff, all of the other work gets easier. And if you eat the wrong stuff, you have less willpower. So everything else is way harder than it needs to be. And that's why I've started, of all those first three F words that I help people with my writing and my community, start with food, because you get that one right. In Fast This Way, the newest book, I found the study that says 15 to 50% of the thoughts you have every day are about what's for your next meal. I'm like, wow. What if you could just turn off by changing what you eat? You just don't think about food at all. And then what would you do with that 15, 25% of thoughts? Could you put those thoughts towards, what can I do today to be of service to my community? Could you put, what do I want to do to change my relationship with God? What do I want to change my relationship with my wife? Like, it's free energy that you're spending. Like, is that tacos? Can I have tacos for lunch? Right? Like it's not useful, but we've got to get control of the urges. And it's the same thing. Is that a pair of legs over there? Hey, look at that camel toe. Like, it's like, oh my God, right? What's going on here? Right? Well, you can get control of that, right? And that is a matter first of self-mastery, but it's also a matter of turning down the volume of the yelling. And you can turn down the volume by training yourself that what you think you need, you don't actually need. You don't need food today because you won't starve for about 90 days. Wow. You just feel like you're going to starve if you don't have lunch. So you think about it all the time. So you train yourself to be resilient. And honestly, not masturbating, not having sex, for 30 days, which is the longest that I went when I did that year of experiments with that. It's a form of fasting. Fasting means going without, and you can fast from substances, that's abstinence, from alcohol or anything else. You can fast from sex and stimulation. There's even something called a dopamine fast I write about. Hey, I'm going to fast from social media, stimulating music, anything that is like really exciting. I'm just going to do it for a week or for a month. I'm not even going to eat spicy food because that's exciting. And at the end of that, everything in life is like brilliant and golden because you reset your sensitivity for excitement and pleasure in your life. So there's all kinds of fasting. And it's funny, if you read spiritual literature, the power to go without for a brief period makes you stronger. It just does.
Yeah, no, it's so good. I mean, anybody that doesn't know what Dave's talking about, like if you just look at the people in line at Chipotle, have you ever noticed the people, they're staring at the glass. They're like this, right?
They're doing this in their mind. They're jonesing.
Yeah, they're just watching it. It's like we're so animalistic. It's almost like I think C.S. Lewis compared to people like that go to strip clubs. It's almost like somebody dangling. Like if you saw somebody that just had a piece of meat dangled in front of them and they just watched it, but they never got to eat it. That's what he compared like strip clubs. Because here we're just looking at these, naked bodies, but we're not having sex with them. It's like you would think that person was a complete deviant, right? Like they were like, that's a guy's a weirdo. He's just looking at this food. That really is how like animalistic we are, and I don't even think we realize it. Like I'll catch myself just like I'm at Subway and I'm just like looking at the food, but it's funny that you mentioned that.
Think of it, when you were a stripper, you know how to wear clothes that drove the women crazy, right? These pants are cut the right way. You think Subway doesn't know that they added so much sugar in their bread that it's considered candy or cake in Ireland? It's not even allowed to be called bread. Right? They wrap their food in sexy clothes so that you'll see that Subway sandwich the way a woman looks at a stripper. It is by design.
Did you hear when they were putting that stuff in the subs that was in like yoga mats a while back?
Oh yeah. My friend Vani Hari brought that one out. Yeah, it was some weird emulsifier. Yeah, there's some stuff in all fast food that's not a good choice if you want to have willpower.
Yeah.
And that's a thing, man. If you want to say, all right, I have enough energy today to not do porn, not masturbate, not do any other things on your list of things you don't want to do, having enough energy is the first place to go. And if you say, well, I just ate like shit, the odds of you, doing things that you regret later goes up greatly. And for me, I write a book every 18 months. I have a really big podcast. I'm CEO of 4 companies. I'm founder and chairman of a really big company of Bulletproof. And I'm a husband. I'm a dad. I don't have time for my energy to flag because, I could drop all that stuff pretty quickly. So I'm real conscious of what I eat because it drives my willpower to do what I want to do and also to not do what I don't want to do.
Yeah, it's great. I definitely I want to pre-order it. If I could put it in now, put me down for a copy.
Yeah, put it in now, fastthisway.com. In fact, if people want to order the book now, you send me a receipt at fastthisway.com. I will, I decided I've been a little bit remiss in my community work. I write these books. It takes thousands of hours, because you've written books. It takes thousands of hours and you really put your thoughts into it and you really like you're putting your energy into it. Right. And then I publish the book and I get everyone, you got to read the book. It's really valuable. And it is, but then I don't teach it. I was a teacher for 5 years at the University of California. I know how to teach. So this one, like you buy the book and I'm going to gift people with 2 weeks of me teaching you the book and actually walking you through it. And the final step of this is what I call spiritual fasting. And so there's a bunch of, biohackers and keto people like, intermittent fasting. I'm like, great. Love you guys. There's also this thing. What if I could use fasting as a way to grow mindfulness, right? A way to grow gratitude, even a way to grow forgiveness. And you sit down and you say, I'm going to go for a day or 2 without food, but I'm going to look at what happens in my mind when I do that. And it's pretty similar to someone who's just starts doing no fap. Like, what do you do with all that time? Maybe you should think about what you're thinking about, right? And it's a spiritual process. So I'm taking people through a 2-week time. Here's how to do it without pain during the week. So you're not hungry. You're fasting. It didn't cost you anything. And there's how to sit down and say, I'm going to feel it and I'm going to do it. And I think it's really valuable to do that in community. And so I'm doing it, with, private Facebook groups and all that. So people can support each other. And, frankly, that's why there's no FAP communities too. Like, hey, I got to talk about what I'm dealing with here because it's a lot, right? And it's okay that it's a lot.
Yeah. No, I've done a decent amount of fasting. I have to say that the days that I think the longest I've ever done no food, I actually did no food and no water even for 3 days because I was
dry fast. That's pretty cool. That's extreme.
I was praying for something that I was, I wanted to put God to the test, I guess, on it. It didn't end up happening. It was for a family member, but it definitely strengthened my resolve, I guess. But yeah. I can say the days that I think I did no food once a week for a year. I was doing that, and it was always like usually sun up to sundown. So I did 24 hours. I didn't really do all,
it's a great strategy.
I didn't want to go to bed.
If people did that, we'd all live longer. But
I tell you what, those were my least favorite days, because I felt like food for me is something, I'm only eating 3 times a day, but I look forward to it. Even though my diet I usually eat the same thing, probably 80 to 90% of the week in, week out. It's the same meals. It's salmon, roasted cauliflower, egg whites in the morning. I know I saw a quote of yours about more than 20% protein. I'm way out of bounds. But anyway, it's the same thing. So like for me, when I fasted, even though I'm eating healthy, I look forward to those 3 times a day, those meals. And I really look forward to when I eat out. Now I've done the Daniel fast through my church.
Yeah, Mark Hyman was real involved with that. He's a dear friend with the Daniel plan. And what happened when you did that fast?
Well, I love it. Well, okay, I've seen miracles happen. I've seen God do bona fide miracles. I felt very healthy. But one thing you said earlier was about regaining sensitivity. And that is something that I definitely experienced to the point where, you don't have coffee for 21 days. And so when you do have coffee, even 6 months later, you could be drinking a cup of coffee and you're like, man, this is good. Cause you remember what it was like to not have it. And I saw an interview do you know who Dan Blazarian is?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay. So Dan Blazarian was talking about how, when he first, years ago, I don't know if he was when he got out of the military, I think it was, he said that he could go to like Outback Steakhouse and he'd be at a 10 on, like happiness wise. And now he said, it doesn't matter what he's doing, but he could be eating at the best restaurants in the world and he can never get past like a 7. So when you talk about regaining your sensitivity, there's definitely a tie between denying yourself and happiness later, because this is a guy that doesn't deny himself at all. He has all the sex with all the people, money, everything, and he can't get past the 7. That's really sad when you think about it. He's completely numbed himself. So like when you deny yourself through fasting, whether it's food or sex or whatever, then you can get, back to a 10. And, I think that is, there's definitely a correlation to it. I don't know. You can probably explain it better than I can.
It's a dopamine sensitivity thing. And it's funny. My son, when he was 10, I've been fasting for 10 years, at least intermittent fasting where you skip breakfast and sometimes longer fasts. So he sees me doing it. And it's not good for kids to fast a lot. They don't need to do it. They can skip breakfast. If they don't want breakfast, that's fine. But he's like, Daddy, I want to try a 24-hour fast. I'm like, oh, really? Okay. I'll support you on that. You're not allowed to do it very often, but you could try it. And I said, why don't you use one of the fasting hacks from the book at the beginning so you don't really feel the hunger and, it's much easier to do it. And he goes, no. I said, I don't want to do that. I want to actually do the whole thing so I can see if I can do it. I'm like, man, that's kind of rock star level. As a dad, I'm like, all right, high five to myself there. And, I just told him, hey, I'm really proud that, you're going to try something new, and it's okay. If you go 24 hours, it's okay if you change your mind halfway through. He goes, no, I think I can do it. So he actually does it. So he has dinner and he says, I'm not going to eat again until dinner the next night. That's 24 hours. And afterwards he has dinner and he goes, Daddy, you're right. Fasting really is the best spice. That was the best dinner I've ever had in my whole life. Right? So there you go. It works on 10-year-olds. It must be real.
Definitely. There's definitely something for delayed gratification. And I think it's the key to all long-term happiness. So what else? The book, obviously, are you working on anything else you're excited about? You want to tell people about?
Well, I'm working on Upgrade Labs. And this is a company I started about 5 years ago around biohacking. And it is a place that has all kinds of technology that you can use to recover faster than you're supposed to. And what I've learned is that, Mother Nature really only has two kinds of exercise. You pick up rocks, or you run away from tigers or something. That's all kinds of exercise, whether you're on a bike or whatever. It's pretty much that. But it turns out with tech, there's ways to turn on muscles that grow 3 times faster than they normally would. And there's also, how do we recover? Well, we lay on a couch or we sleep. That's about it. But now with things like lasers and lighting and cryotherapy and pulsed magnets, there's all kinds of things you can do that give you like huge amounts of energy. And so I've got a couple of these open down in LA. And even though we have this whole pandemic thing going on, I'm looking in 2021 on expanding this to more locations around the country. And I think it's going to be a big thing, because if you only have an hour today, you can go to some kind of, an exercise thing for an hour. But what if there was real hardcore science that showed you could get better cardiovascular performance in 7 minutes that didn't even make you sweat than spinning and kind of grinding it out for 45 minutes? And then you had another 43 minutes left that you could do, or actually 53 minutes left that you could do something else with. Then what if I said, stand in this chamber for 3 minutes where the air is chilled to 260 degrees below zero. And it's just the air that's chilled. So it's like walking outside in winter in shorts. But you feel it. And what if that was going to burn hundreds more calories and just make you feel this elated feeling and just, make your skin look better and all that? You're like, wait, I still have like 40 minutes left. What else can I do? So it's the idea that we have so much energy that we can put into something. And if we can put less energy into recovering and put less energy into becoming stronger and younger, what do we do then when we walk out of there with more energy than we came in with? I believe that energy goes to being kind, and it goes towards being a better human being when we have enough. And it's when we're too stressed, we're too anxious, we're overtrained, we're underslept, we're under-recovered. That's when we treat each other like jerks. And that's when we give into fear. That's when we do things that are terrible decisions because someone told us to, because we just didn't have the energy to think.
That's so
I want people to have more energy.
Yeah, it's so good, man. I know, like, when I get really spread thin, or just my cup gets empty, I guess.
Yeah.
I get very withdrawn. I get very selfish because I'm in survival mode at that point. I don't have that bandwidth to like be sacrificial for someone, even to be kind or engage in a conversation for me might be just too much at the moment. So I definitely think that there's something to what you're saying. Now, I know you've been quoted as saying you believe you're going to live to be 180. You think we're going to find a cure for death or aging in our lifetime?
Well, it's actually at least 180, because I don't want to put a cap on there. And if you read, real old editions of the Bible, they talk about people living 400 years.
Yeah.
Right.
I think Methuselah, I want to say it was like 900 and some or something was the oldest.
Yeah.
guy.
Methuselah was more than 400, right?
Yeah.
And if you look back, even in recent history in India, there's, reasonable accounts of people living to 185 years. And we know in the West, we got people who are 120 years old today walking around right now.
So who lived to be 185? Who did you
this guy's name starts with M. This is one of the Indian guys. There's a book out. It's very little known book, and I just don't remember the title. I'd tell you. And it's from the grandson of the guy's original caretaker. And like the multiple generations of people were taking care of this guy, and he would, fast in a cave in darkness for 90 days every couple. All kinds of crazy. So I don't know how real that is. But it sounds pretty real when you read the book. It's pretty darn detailed. And then there's accounts of these practices for rejuvenation that are not well known. But all I do know that's very provable, there's a person alive today who's 120. And that person was alive for World War I. They fought World War I with horses still. I mean, they had tanks and all that, but barely, right? Airplanes had barely even been invented. Actually, in World War I, were they? I don't even remember.
They fought in World War I even, right?
Yeah, they could have if they were 120. Well, let's see. They would have been born. Yeah, they actually probably would have been born in 1900.
They could have. Yeah, they could have, please.
So you're like, holy crap, this person was alive before antibiotics, before we could spell DNA, because we hadn't figured out yet. They didn't know what mitochondria was. They didn't have access to testosterone. They probably drank and smoked and all kinds of stuff, right? Okay, that's looking backwards. Now, if over the next 100 years, we can't do 50% better than our current best, it's because a comet hit the planet, man.
Right.
Like, and because for 20 years I've run an anti-aging nonprofit group, I know the people doing the research, and there are people who have spent 20 and 30 years unpacking the tiniest things. I interviewed some guys actually just yesterday. I was about to come out on Bulletproof Radio. They spent the last 10 years looking at pomegranates, like 10 years on pomegranates. Okay. And what they figured out is there's this one thing that if you have the right gut bacteria and the pomegranate breaks down to this, which breaks down to this. And when we give people this, they live longer. Well, at least if they give it to worms, which is what we test a lot of anti-aging stuff on, these little worms that have a lot of genes, they live 50% longer. And in mouse studies, mice live longer. Like, holy crap. So yeah, that just came out. That product has never existed. It's 4 months old. And there's just dozens and dozens of things like that. And then you talk to the big guns. I've had my bone marrow taken out and spun down into my stem cells and re-injected into everything in my body. My joints, my reproductive organs, my brain. Okay. I do this. I wrote a big book about anti-aging. I'm like, I'm going to try what all the crazy billionaires are trying. And what I do know is that all that stuff is going to become commonly available for everyone over the next 20 years. Meanwhile, our knowledge is coming out. Yesterday, a new study came out. They found a drug. They give it to you 5 times, and it reverses age-related declines in memory. 5 doses, reboot your cells, and make your brain work like a young person's brain.
Wow.
That's epic. And I'm not bragging here. I'm just like, as an example, as a guinea pig. Okay. My blood vessels have the flexibility of the average 24-year-old. My brain's response time, which always gets slower as you age, my brain responds exactly as fast as the average 20-year-old. And this is on a quantitative analysis. You can't cheat on this. It's like, a light flashes. How quickly does your brain recognize the flash? My brain's still young. My eyes, I can read the finest print. They aren't stiffening the way they're supposed to when you're 48. And you go on and on. It's possible. And for me, yeah, I've spent $1 million on all this, and probably 800,000 of that was on stuff that didn't work. Because like, we don't know, but I'm willing to have the most expensive pee on earth by taking a lot of supplements. It's okay. But if I can do it with all that crazy stuff, imagine what happens as we start honing in on exactly what works for what person when. It is happening. Yeah. There are people listening to the show, including you and me, who are going to live way longer than we think we are. And when we're old, we're not going to have transparent skin and walkers and tubes everywhere. We're going to be actually able to share the wisdom of being 100 years old and have enough energy to stand up like, you know what? I've seen this show before. Here's what's going to happen. And you'll be able to talk to a 20-year-old like, you know what? You really don't want to marry that person. I can tell you why, because I did it when I was 20, and I can tell you 15 other examples. So let me show you the stuff. And by the way, I'm going to be around for another 100 years. No, you're not allowed to throw that plastic in the ocean, right? So this is about having our elders back, because when you have an elder who guides you, this is what your grandparents used to do and great grandparents, right? They were venerated, and they'd put their arm around you and they'd say, Sonny, yeah, you ought not to masturbate like that. I know, because I did it, right? Whatever they're going to say, right? So I want more of that. And we're going to build a world full of wise people who have the energy to give back. It is inevitable. The science is happening all over the planet. There's way too much of it to put back in the bottle.
That's awesome. I mean, we'll see. If Jesus doesn't come back, that's the only caveat right there, I believe, because I think the second coming might be a little closer than we think it is.
Fair point. Comet hitting or Jesus coming back. There you go.
Yeah, that could be the trump card or the deal breaker. But man, I really enjoyed this conversation. Honestly, I was like, I wasn't sure how it was going to go, because a lot of my audience, was about sex and waiting and, a lot of Christian people in there, but it was fascinating. And I think, the listeners,
I truly believe everything I've ever written about is in alignment with Christian values.
Yeah.
And, maybe the one area where we might not agree is when I interviewed, 500 other really successful people. I'm like, don't listen to me because I could be wrong, and don't listen to one of these people because they could be wrong. So I'm just going to ask 500 of them and we'll boil it all down. And then it's probably going to be right. And then, I'll be the guy who boils it down, but it's not me. Yeah. And there's some value for saying, look, especially in a relationship, if you want something in bed and you have a strong desire for it, it's okay to ask your partner for it, right? Because if you're feeling unsatisfied, satisfying yourself. And I don't know if everyone would agree with that, but otherwise, everything else that I've written about is very much in alignment with this. And it's like, look, you got to really own what's going on in your head and what's going on in your heart. And you've got to have the willpower to be the person you want to be. And the things I write about are how to have the strength to do that. And that's why I think people like Fast This Way, especially.
Yeah, I can't wait to read it. Well, thank you so much for coming on, David. It really has been an honor to talk to you, and really loved your wisdom.
I'm really happy you had me on today, and I appreciate what you do.
Thank you, Dave. Wow, what an incredible interview. I hope you all enjoyed that as much as I did. We talked a lot about sex in this interview and even my book. So if you haven't read my book, I'm giving away free copies. I'm just asking for people to pay for shipping and handling. And it comes with over $130 in bonuses, like my Truth About Sex study guide, the videos that go along with it, and some other things. You can go to whywaitingworks.net and you can pick up a copy today. The other thing I want to mention is CityFam. We have a goal setting conference coming up this January, next month, and it's called Seize the Day. And it's going to be all done virtually. It's going to be over the course of a Friday and a Saturday. And we're really going to help people get clear about what they want to accomplish for 2021 and really making it the best year of their life. Some of the things that I've accomplished this year, even during a pandemic, was I was able to launch a podcast, write another book, launched an online coaching program, and some other things. And in large part because I got clear in the beginning of this year what I was hoping to accomplish. It helped me, just make some incredible strides. So we want to do that for everyone. You can check it out at cityfam.com. You can learn more about how to register and attend, and I promise you, you will not be disappointed. So that's it for episode 32. Thank you, and I will see y'all next week.